The champagne in Elena's glass had lost its chill, but not nearly as fast as the warmth in her eyes whenever she looked away from her husband and toward the man across the room. It was a silent exchange in the middle of a crowded Manhattan gala. A brush of fingers against a tuxedo sleeve. A lingering gaze that spoke of midnight cab rides and sheets that didn't belong to a marital bed. Lucas saw it all, standing quietly in the shadow of his wife's ambition, realizing that to her, his silence looked like weakness, not the patience of a man waiting for the right moment to walk away. If you find yourself drawn to the quiet devastation of secrets revealed too late and the cold reckoning of betrayed love, stay with us, because the truth is often the most dangerous thing to hold. The distinct sound of crystal clinking against silverware sliced through the murmur of the crowd at the Met Gala fundraiser. For Lucas, it was a sound that usually signaled a toast, a moment of celebration. But tonight, standing on the periphery of the ballroom near a pillar of faux Greek marble, it sounded like a gavel striking a judge's block. He watched his wife, Elena, across the room. She was radiant in emerald silk, a color that brought out the sharp ambition in her eyes. She wasn't looking for him. Her attention was entirely consumed by the man standing next to her, Julian Vance, a venture capitalist, whose laughter was a little too loud and whose teeth were a little too white. "Lucas, you're staring again." Lucas didn't turn. He knew the voice. It was Clara, one of Elena's friends, holding a martini with a look of pity that Lucas found more insulting than hatred. "Just admiring the view, Clara," Lucas said, his voice steady, devoid of the turmoil churning in his gut. "You should go over there," Clara whispered, stepping closer, smelling of expensive gin and malice. "Stop her before she makes a fool of you. Everyone sees it, Lucas. The way she touches his arm, it's unbecoming." Lucas took a sip of his sparkling water. "Let her be happy, Clara. It seems she's found someone who speaks her language." Across the room, the dynamic shifted. Elena and Julian were now encircled by a group of investors. Lucas could read lips well enough, but he didn't need to. He knew the script. He began to walk toward them, not to intervene, but to let the reality wash over him one last time. As he approached, the circle didn't break. Elena's back was to him, but her voice carried clearly over the ambient jazz. "Honestly, it's exhausting," Elena was saying, her hand resting casually on Julian's forearm. "I love Lucas, I do, but he lacks vision. He's content with his little drawings and his safe salary. He doesn't understand that in this city. If you aren't hunting, you're prey." Julian chuckled, covering her hand with his. "Some men are built for the sidelines, darling. They keep the seats warm for the players." The group laughed. It was a polite, cruel sound. Lucas stopped 5 feet away. He caught the eye of a man facing him, a tech CEO named Miller, who suddenly stopped laughing and cleared his throat awkwardly. The silence spread like a contagion until it reached Elena. She turned. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but then terrifyingly, it hardened. There was no guilt, only annoyance. "Lucas," she said, her tone sharp, "I didn't know you were hovering." "I wasn't hovering," Lucas said calmly. He looked at Julian, then back to his wife. "I just came to tell you the car is here if you want to leave, but it looks like you have a different ride tonight." Elena's eyes narrowed. The air between them crackled with the unspoken. She stepped forward, closing the distance so only he could hear, though the venom in her whisper was palpable. "Don't embarrass me," she hissed. "Look at you. You're wearing a suit from 2 seasons ago. You stand in corners while men like Julian build empires. You want to know why I'm standing here? Because he knows how to convert ambition into currency. You just know how to budget. Lucas looked at her. Really looked at her. For the first time in months. He saw the beautiful lines of her face. The woman he had supported while she built her PR firm. The woman whose student loans he had quietly paid off 3 years ago. He realized then that he wasn't angry. He was just done. You're right, Elena, Lucas said, his voice soft, almost gentle. I don't know how to make the kind of money Julian makes, and I suppose I never will. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the valet ticket for their shared Mercedes, and placed it gently on the waiter's passing tray. Enjoy the empire, Lucas said. He didn't look at Julian. He didn't look back at the stunned circle of socialites. He simply turned and walked toward the exit, the heavy oak doors of the ballroom feeling less like a barrier and more like the gates to a life he should have reclaimed years ago. Outside, the New York air was cold and biting, but for the first time in a decade, Lucas could breathe. The conference room on the 42nd floor of the Sterling and Cooper building smelled of lemon polish and aggressive cologne. It was a sterile aquarium of glass and steel, offering a panoramic view of Manhattan, the very city Lucas had spent his life trying to understand through lines and angles. Now the only lines that mattered were the ones waiting for his signature on the mahogany table. Elena sat opposite him. She wore a sharp white blazer, structural and imposing, designed to intimidate. Next to her sat Arthur Kane, a divorce attorney known in the city as the Butcher, who was currently arranging his files with the precision of a man preparing for war. Lucas sat alone. He hadn't brought a lawyer. He had simply brought a pen. Mr. Rossi, Kane began, his voice smooth and practiced. My client is prepared to offer a settlement, but given the disparity in income potential and the lifestyle Mrs. Rossi has become accustomed to, we will be asking for full ownership of the Tribeca loft, the portfolio in the joint Schwab account, and spousal support for a period of no less than 5 years. Kane paused, waiting for the outrage. He leaned back, steepling his fingers, ready for Lucas to shout, to bargain, to plead poverty. Elena watched Lucas closely. Her eyes were hard, searching for a crack in his composure. She wanted him to fight. She needed him to fight. If he fought, it meant he still cared. It meant she was a prize worth warring over. Lucas looked down at the documents, the Tribeca loft. He remembered sanding the floorboards of that apartment himself, spending weekends covered in sawdust, while Elena complained about the noise. He remembered designing the kitchen to catch the morning light exactly where she liked to drink her coffee. It wasn't just an asset. It was years of his labor, his love, materialized in brick and mortar. He looked up, meeting Elena's gaze. There was no anger in his eyes, only a profound fatigue. Okay, Lucas said. The silence that followed was heavy and confused. Kane blinked, his predatory smile faltering. Excuse me? I said okay, Lucas repeated, his voice level. She can have the loft. She can have the account. I'll agree to the support payments if we can finalize this today. Elena shifted in her chair, her brow furrowing. You're not going to contest the apartment? It's worth $3 million, Lucas. I know what it's worth, Elena. I built the interior, Lucas said softly. He reached for the water pitcher and poured himself a glass, his hand steady. But I'm not interested in a negotiation. You want the lifestyle? Take it. You want the money? Take it. I just want the paperwork done. You're just going to give up? Elena's voice rose, losing its polished control. Just like that? This is why you never went anywhere, Lucas. You have no fight in you. no backbone. She was baiting him, trying to ignite a fire from the ashes. She couldn't understand that he wasn't surrendering out of weakness. He was paying a ransom for his peace. He was buying his way out of a life that no longer fit him. "Is there anything else?" Lucas asked, turning his attention back to the lawyer. Kane, looking thoroughly disappointed that he wouldn't get to bill for a protracted battle, slid the final decree across the table. "Sign here, here, and initial at the bottom." The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was the only noise in the room. Scritch, scratch. The sound of a marriage ending, the sound of a tether snapping. Lucas capped the pen and stood up. He didn't check his watch. He didn't look at the view. "Goodbye, Elena," he said. It wasn't a question or a wish. It was a statement of fact. "Where will you go?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. For a second, she looked less like the ambitious PR executive and more like the woman he had once promised to protect. "You don't have anywhere." "I'll find somewhere," Lucas said. "I'm an architect. I know how to build from the ground up." He walked out of the glass room, leaving the heavy door to click shut behind him. Inside, Elena sat surrounded by her victory, the deeds, the accounts, the settlements. Yet as she looked at the empty chair opposite her, the room felt suddenly overwhelmingly vast and cold. She had won everything she asked for, but for the first time she wondered if she had actually lost. 12 months. 365 days. That was how long it had taken for the Tribeca loft to transform from a home into a showroom. Elena stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the gray Manhattan skyline. The apartment was filled with new furniture, Italian leather sofas that were too low to be comfortable, abstract sculptures that looked like violent accidents, and cold chrome surfaces that repelled fingerprints. It was exactly the aesthetic Julian wanted. Impressive, expensive, and utterly soulless. The front door slammed shut, echoing through the hollow space. It was 2 a.m. "You're still up," Julian said, tossing his jacket onto one of the pristine sofas. He didn't look at her. He went straight to the liquor cabinet, pouring a scotch with a hand that shook slightly. "I was worried," Elena said, tightening her silk robe. "You didn't answer my texts. The dinner with the Japanese investors. Did it go late?" Julian downed the drink in one swallow. "The deal is complicated, Elena. You wouldn't understand the nuances." He turned to her then, his eyes bloodshot. The charm that had seduced her a year ago was fraying at the edges, revealing a manic energy underneath. "And stop asking about the credit card limit. My accountant is moving assets around. It's temporary." "I just tried to buy groceries, Julian. It was humiliating," she whispered, the shame of the declined transaction at Whole Foods still burning her cheeks. "Then go to a different store," he snapped, slamming the glass down. "God, you sound just like a nagging wife. I thought you were supposed to be the fun one. The muse. Don't turn into a burden, Elena." He walked past her into the bedroom, leaving the scent of stale cigar smoke and another woman's cloyingly sweet perfume in his wake. Elena stood frozen in the living room, the room Lucas had built for her, feeling the walls closing in. She had traded a man who built her shelves for a man who treated her like an ornament on one. Across the river, in a repurposed warehouse in Red Hook, the vibe was entirely different. The space was vast, smelling of raw timber, sawdust, and strong black coffee. It was 5 a.m., and Lucas was already awake. In fact, he hadn't slept. He stood over a massive drafting table, illuminated by a single industrial lamp. Spread out before him were the blueprints for The Sanctuary, a project commissioned by a reclusive billionaire who wanted a home that disappeared into the landscape of the Hamptons. Lucas held a pencil, his fingers calloused and stained with graphite. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore a thermal shirt and jeans covered in drywall dust. He looked tired, yes, but there was a sharpness to his gaze that had been missing during his marriage. "Boss," a voice called out. It was Mike, the foreman, walking in with 2 steaming paper cups. "Materials for the East Wing just arrived, but the supplier is asking about the name on the invoice. They still don't know who Architect X is." Lucas took the coffee, blowing the steam away. "Keep it that way, Mike. Tell them the billing goes through the holding company. My name doesn't go on anything public. You know this design is going to win awards, right?" Mike said, looking down at the intricate sketches of glass cantilevered over water. "People are going to want to know who did it." "Let them guess," Lucas replied, turning back to the paper. "Fame is noise. I just want to build." He drew a line, decisive and dark. In the silence of the warehouse, surrounded by the honest tools of creation, Lucas felt a peace he had never found in the high society galas. He was no longer Elena's husband. He was no longer the man who stood in corners. He was the architect of his own reconstruction, brick by brick, silence by silence. Back in Tribeca, Elena lay awake in the dark, listening to Julian's heavy breathing, wondering when the sun would rise, and fearing what the light might reveal. The end of the world didn't come with a bang. It came with a polite but firm knock on the door at 6:15 a.m. Elena, groggy and wrapped in a cashmere throw, opened the heavy steel door of the penthouse. She expected a delivery, perhaps the dry cleaning Julian had screamed about the night before. Instead, she found 6 men and women in windbreakers emblazoned with 3 yellow letters. FBI. "Federal agents," the lead officer said, holding up a badge that caught the dull morning light. "We have a warrant for the arrest of Julian Vance and the seizure of assets related to the Vance Capital investigation." Elena stood frozen, the cold air from the hallway biting at her bare ankles. This is a mistake. My husband is asleep." "He's not your husband, ma'am," the agent said, stepping past her with efficient indifference. "Technically, he's your cohabitant, and he's definitely not sleeping." The next hour was a blur of controlled chaos. There was no screaming, no dramatic resistance. Julian emerged from the bedroom not in a rage, but in a state of pathetic resignation. He looked smaller without his Italian suits, his face pale and clammy. As they cuffed his hands behind his back, he didn't look at Elena. He looked at the floor, muttering something about accounting errors and misunderstandings. "Julian?" Elena's voice was barely a whisper. She stood by the marble island, clutching her robe as if it were armor. "Julian, tell them. Tell them this is the apartment I got in the divorce. It's mine." An agent near the window, who was currently tagging the abstract sculpture with an evidence sticker, looked up. "Actually, Ms. Rossi, according to our records, this property was leveraged as collateral for Mr. Vance's liquidity fund 6 months ago. It's part of the forfeiture." The ground seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "Leveraged? But he said he was investing in it." "He was gambling with it," the agent corrected dryly. "You have 24 hours to vacate the premises. Take only personal essentials. Anything purchased with funds from the joint accounts stays." By noon, the apartment was a skeleton. The silence that returned was different from the silence of Lucas's departure. That silence had been heavy with unspoken emotion. This silence was empty, sterile, and terrifying. 3 weeks later, The pawn shop on 8th Avenue smelled of dust and desperation. Elena stood at the counter, placing a Hermes Birkin bag on the scratched glass surface. It was the bag she had bought to celebrate her first anniversary with Julian, a celebration of a lie. 1,200, the broker said, barely looking up from his phone. It cost 12,000, Elena said, her voice trembling. It's authentic. Look at the stitching. 1,200. Take it or leave it. Market's flooded with these things lately. Lots of rich girls having bad years. She took the money. She had no choice. Her bank accounts were frozen pending the investigation. Her PR clients had dropped her the moment the news broke, not wanting to be associated with the Vance Ponzi scandal. The social circle that had toasted her ambition now ghosted her calls. She walked out into the gray afternoon rain, clutching the envelope of cash. She checked her phone. A notification popped up from a temp agency she had registered with under her maiden name. Role, real estate stager assistant. Hourly wage, 20 tutern. Location, tri-state area. Urgent fill needed for high-end properties. Elena stared at the screen. Staging. It was basically moving furniture, fluffing pillows, creating the illusion of a perfect home for strangers to buy. It was manual labor disguised as design. It was beneath her. But then she looked at her reflection in a shop window. Her hair was frizzy from the rain. Her coat was from a season ago, and her eyes were haunted by the fear of eviction from her sublet studio in Queens. She wasn't the woman who sipped champagne at the Met Gala anymore. She was just another New Yorker trying to survive the wreckage of her own choices. Her thumb hovered over the accept button. She pressed it. The confirmation screen flashed green. It felt less like a new beginning and more like a sentence. 3 years could erode a mountain, or it could carve a diamond. For Elena, 3 years had simply sanded away the gloss. She steered the company van, a rattled Ford Transit that smelled of pine cleaner and stale coffee, down the winding private road in East Hampton. The gravel crunched loudly under, the tires, a stark contrast to the hush of the surrounding forest. This wasn't the flashy part of the Hamptons she used to frequent with Julian, the parties with DJ sets and overflowing seafood towers. This was the deep woods, where old money and new secrets lived behind 10-foot hedges. Check the address again, her supervisor Sarah said from the passenger seat, scrolling anxiously through her iPad. The agency said this place is called The Sanctuary. The owner is some ghost figure. Doesn't do press, doesn't do open houses. We have 48 hours to make it look lived in before the private viewing. I have the coordinates, Elena said, her voice husky from fatigue. She had been up since 4, loading crates of faux books and cashmere blankets. Her hands, once manicured to perfection, were now rough, the nails cut short and practical. The trees cleared, and the house revealed itself. Elena hit the brakes. The van skidded to a gentle halt. It wasn't a mansion in the traditional sense. There were no white columns, no sprawling lawns meant for croquet. It was a structure of glass, dark cedar, and concrete that seemed to float above the landscape. It was low, sleek, and terrified of nothing. It embraced the woods rather than dominating them. Wow, Sarah breathed. That's intense. Elena didn't say anything. A strange shiver ran down her spine, a sense of déjà vu that she couldn't place. The way the roofline angled to catch the afternoon sun, it felt deliberate, like a mathematical equation for warmth. They parked and began the grueling process of unloading. Elena carried a heavy box of ceramic vases up the floating stone steps. Her back ached, a constant companion these days. She was 32, but she felt 50. The entitlement that had fueled her previous life had been replaced by a survival instinct that left no room for ego. She was the help now. She was the invisible hand that made rich people's lives look effortless. Inside, the house was even more breathtaking. The main living space was an open expanse facing the ocean, but the light was filtered through louvers that softened the glare. Elena set the box down on the kitchen island, a slab of raw, honed basalt. She ran her hand over the cool stone. "Start with the master suite," Sarah called out from the hallway. "And be careful with the floors. They're imported reclaimed oak. If you scratch them, it's coming out of your paycheck." Elena made her way to the master bedroom. It was sparse, waiting for her touch. She unpacked the linens, snapping the sheets with practiced efficiency. As she moved around the room, she noticed the details. The reading nook built into the window frame was exactly wide enough for a person to curl up with knees bent. Her favorite position. The lighting switches were placed at a height that felt intuitive, exactly where her hand naturally reached. It was unnerving. Most architect-designed homes felt like museums, cold and awkward. This place felt like it had been measured against a human soul. She paused by the window, looking out at the infinity pool that merged with the gray horizon of the Atlantic. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine living here, not as the stager, but as the mistress of the house, waking up to this light, walking on these floors barefoot. Then she caught her reflection in the glass. Her uniform polo shirt was wrinkled, her ponytail was messy. The fantasy shattered. She wasn't the woman who lived in houses like this anymore. She was the woman who cleaned up before the real owners arrived. "Focus, Elena," she whispered to herself. She knelt down to adjust the rug, pulling it a fraction of an inch to the left to align with the fireplace. Perfect symmetry. That was what the job required. She had to create a lie of perfection for someone else's happiness. Outside, the sound of a heavy engine approached. A truck, not a limousine. Elena stood up, brushing the lint from her knees. The maintenance crew, or perhaps the landscape architects, were arriving. She needed to coordinate with them before the sun went down. She didn't know that the architecture of her past was about to collide with the reality of her present. She didn't know that the ghost in the machine was already here. The late afternoon sun cast long, amber shadows across the terrace of the sanctuary. The air had turned crisp, carrying the salty tang of the Atlantic mixed with the resinous scent of cedar. Elena stepped out through the sliding glass walls, needing a moment of reprieve from the suffocating perfection of the interior she was staging. She walked to the edge of the infinity pool, her heels clicking softly on the imported slate. That was when she saw him. A man was kneeling near the far edge of the deck, where the wood met the raw concrete retaining wall. He wore faded Carhartt work pants, stained with dark oil and gray dust, and a t-shirt that had seen better decades. He was focused intently on a section of the railing, using a fine grit sanding block to smooth out an imperceptible flaw in the joinery. There was something about the curve of his back, the methodical rhythm of his arm, that stopped Elena's heart in her chest. She knew those shoulders. She knew the way that head tilted slightly to the left when focused. Lucas? The name escaped her lips before she could weigh the consequences. The sanding stopped. The man paused, his hand hovering over the wood, before slowly turning around. It was him. He looked older, perhaps a bit leaner. His hair was longer, dusted with sawdust, and there was a smudge of grease high on his cheekbone. He squinted against the sun, shading his eyes with a hand that was rough and calloused. "Elena," he said. His voice was gravelly, unused to speech after hours of solitary work. For a moment, Elena felt a wash of complex emotions: shock, nostalgia, and then, overwhelmingly, relief. She took a step closer, her posture straightening instinctively. She smoothed the front of her blazer. In her mind, the narrative rearranged itself instantly. She was here as a professional consultant for a luxury firm. He was here, on his knees. I didn't know you were working out here," Elena said, forcing a polite smile. Her eyes traveled down to his scuffed boots and the tool belt slung low on his hips. "The Hamptons? It's a long commute for a maintenance gig." Lucas stood up, wiping his hands on a rag tucked into his belt. He didn't seem embarrassed. If anything, he looked indifferent. "The work is where the site is. You know how it is." "Of course," Elena said, her voice dropping into a register of sympathetic condescension. "I suppose construction is booming right now. It's good. Honest work. Good for you, Lucas. Keeping busy." She felt a sudden toxic surge of vindication. For 3 years, she had feared that he might have secretly succeeded, that his silence meant he was building an empire to spite her. But here he was, a glorified handyman, sanding decks for the ultra-rich while she was at least deciding where the furniture went. She wasn't the one with dirt under her fingernails. "And you?" Lucas asked, his gaze drifting to the clipboard in her hand. "You're with the staging company." "I'm managing the aesthetic direction for the property," she lied smoothly, inflating her title. "Ensuring the atmosphere aligns with the client's vision. It's a very demanding clientele." "I imagine it is," Lucas said dryly. He turned back to the railing, running his thumb over the grain he had just smoothed. "This wood is sensitive to humidity. It needs to be treated carefully." Elena took another step, feeling bold. She reached into her pocket. She didn't have much, but the gesture felt necessary. It was the final nail in the coffin of their marriage, her benevolence toward his failure. "Lucas, look," she said, lowering her voice. "I know things must be tight. The city is expensive. If you need a reference, for more steady work, I know some property managers in the city. I could put in a word." Lucas looked at her then. His eyes were dark, unreadable pools. There was no gratitude, but no anger either. It was the look one might give a stranger who had misread a map. "That won't be necessary, Elena," he said quietly. "Don't be proud," she insisted, mistaking his dignity for shame. "We're adults. I'm just trying to help. Whoever owns this place, I heard he's a perfectionist nightmare. I wouldn't want you to get fired over a scuff mark." Before Lucas could respond, the sound of tires on gravel grew loud again. This wasn't a truck. It was the low, powerful purr of luxury engines. Elena turned to see a cavalcade of 3 black SUVs pulling up to the main entrance. The doors opened in unison. Men in Italian suits stepped out, followed by a woman holding a camera and a microphone. "Oh God!" Elena panicked, checking her watch. "The investors and the press. They're early. Lucas, you need to go around the back. You can't be seen here looking like that. They want the pristine look." She turned back to him, waving her hand urgently toward the service path. "Go, quickly. I'll cover for you." Lucas didn't move. He simply folded the rag, placed it in his back pocket, and stood his ground, watching the approaching group with a calmness that Elena found infuriatingly stupid. "Lucas, please," Elena hissed, her voice trembling with a mix of panic and command. "They are literally 10 feet away. Don't be stubborn. Go to the service entrance. I'll explain to the supervisor later." She positioned herself physically between Lucas and the approaching group, using her body as a shield to hide what she considered an eyesore. She smoothed her hair, plastered on her most professional, welcoming smile, and prepared to greet the delegation. Leading the pack was Silas Thorne, a real estate mogul whose face had graced the cover of Forbes twice. Flanking him were two senior partners from a global architectural firm and a journalist from Architectural Digest, recognizable by her severe glasses and recording device. Elena stepped forward, extending her hand. "Mr. Thorne, welcome to the sanctuary. I'm Elena Rossi, the lead staging coordinator. We've prepared the interior to perfectly reflect the—" Thorne didn't stop. He didn't slow down. He didn't even look at her. His gaze was fixed over her shoulder, laser-focused on the man standing by the railing in dirty work pants. Elena's hand was left hanging in the cool ocean air, grasping at nothing. She turned, confused, watching as the group surged past her like a tide moving toward gravity. "Lucas!" Thorne called out, his booming voice filled with a warmth that Elena had never heard directed at anyone in her social circles. "I knew we'd find you obsessing over the details." Elena froze. The breath caught in her throat. She watched in slow motion as Silas Thorne, a man worth billions, reached out and grabbed Lucas's hand. Lucas hesitated, showing his palm covered in sanding dust, but Thorne gripped it firmly anyway, shaking it with vigorous respect. "The patina on the cedar is perfect," Thorne said, gesturing to the railing Lucas had been working on. "You were right to insist on the manual finish. The machines would have killed the grain." "It needed to breathe," Lucas replied calmly, his voice steady and authoritative. He wasn't deferring to Thorne. He was speaking to him as an equal. "If you seal it too early, the salt air rots it from the inside out. It takes patience. And that is why you are the only name on my list." Thorne laughed, turning to the journalist. "Ms. Clare, this is him, the ghost, the man who designed every inch of this property, from the foundation to the horizon line. Mr. Lucas Rossi." The journalist stepped forward, eyes wide with admiration. "Mr. Rossi, it is an honor. Your work on the Hudson Project was revolutionary, but this is your masterpiece. We've been trying to get an interview for 2 years." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Her legs felt like water. The clipboard slipped from her numb fingers and clattered onto the slate deck. The sound caused the group to turn briefly. Thorne looked at Elena as if noticing a piece of furniture that had been placed in the wrong room. "Is she with you, Lucas?" Thorne asked, his brow furrowing slightly. Lucas looked at Elena. The silence stretched, thin and agonizing. Elena stood there, the tip she had mentally prepared to give him burning a hole in her conscience. She saw herself through his eyes, frantic, superficial, clinging to a ladder that he had long ago transcended. She wasn't the manager. She wasn't the wife of a failure. She was the ex-wife of a visionary she had been too blind to see. "She's with the staging crew," Lucas said quietly. He didn't expose her. He didn't mock her. He simply categorized her. "They're finishing up inside." "Right. Well," Thorne dismissed her with a wave of his hand. "Come, Lucas. The investors are waiting in the great room. They want you to walk them through the solar integration. Champagne is already poured." "I need to clean up first," Lucas said, looking at his shirt. "Nonsense," Thorne slapped him on the back. "You look like a man who actually works for a living. That's exactly the image we want. Come." The group moved toward the sliding glass doors, a phalanx of power and influence surrounding the man in the dirty boots. Lucas walked in the center, answering a question about structural load-bearing with the casual brilliance of a master. He didn't look back. Elena was left alone on the terrace. The wind picked up, blowing a strand of hair across her face. She looked down at her hands, clean, manicured, and empty. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She was the one standing on the outside. She was the one who didn't belong. The reception was winding down. The golden hour had faded into a deep, bruised twilight over the Hamptons. Inside the great glass room, the laughter of billionaires and the clinking of champagne flutes created a melody of success that Elena could only listen to from the hallway. She had finished her job. The cushions were plumped, the candles were lit, and the illusion of a perfect home was complete. But she lingered near the heavy oak front door, her keys clutching tightly in her hand, waiting. Finally, Lucas separated himself from the group. He walked toward the entrance, not to leave, but to get a breath of air. He had cleaned up, washed the grime from his face and hands, but he was still wearing his work clothes. Strangely, amidst the tuxedos and designer dresses, he looked the most dignified. He saw her standing there. He didn't startle. He simply stopped, maintaining a respectful distance. "I thought you had left with the crew," Lucas said. His voice was calm, devoid of the jagged edges that usually accompany a confrontation with an ex-spouse. "I wanted to say goodbye," Elena said. She took a step forward, entering his personal space. The smell of cedar and rain still clung to him, a scent she used to complain about, which now smelled like stability. "Lucas, I truly didn't know about all of this, about who you had become." Lucas looked at the house behind him, the warm light spilling out onto the lawn. "I didn't become anything new, Elena. I was always this person. You just never looked past the paycheck." "That's not fair," she whispered, her eyes stinging. "We were young. We made mistakes. Julian was a mistake, but we had something real once, didn't we? Before the noise." She reached out, her fingers grazing the rough fabric of his sleeve. It was a test, a gamble. She was banking on the history of 10 years, hoping that the embers of their marriage could still be fanned into a flame that would warm her cold, lonely reality. Lucas didn't pull away violently. He simply stepped back, a smooth, deliberate motion that put an ocean of distance between them. "We had a foundation, Elena," he said softly. "But you took a sledgehammer to it because you wanted a faster build. You can't live in a house you destroyed." "I can change," she pleaded, the desperation finally cracking her professional mask. "I'm not that person anymore. Look at me, I'm working. I'm humble. We could grab a coffee just to catch up? I'd love to hear about your design process." Lucas looked at her with a profound, terrifying clarity. In his eyes, she saw no hatred. Hatred implies passion. Hatred implies that she still held power over him. Instead, she saw the look a stranger gives a passing car, acknowledgement, but no connection. "I don't think that's a good idea," he said. "I have a life here. I have work to do. And you have a long drive back to the city." "Lucas." "Goodbye, Elena," he said. It was final. It was absolute. He turned around. The movement was decisive. He walked back toward the light, toward the people who respected him, toward the home he had built from his own silence and strength. The heavy door closed behind him with a solid, resonant thud. Elena was left standing on the gravel driveway. The silence of the woods rushed back in, deafening and cold. She looked down at the keys in her hand. Keys to a battered company van, to a rented room in Queens, to a life of hollow staging. She climbed into the driver's seat and turned the ignition. The engine sputtered before roaring to life. a harsh, mechanical sound that shattered the peace of the evening. As she drove away, she watched the house in the rearview mirror. It glowed like a lantern in the dark forest, a sanctuary she was forbidden to enter, shrinking smaller and smaller until it was just a speck of light. And then, nothing. The road ahead was dark, and for the first time she realized she had to drive it alone.